And the hallmarks of an initiation culture are that individuals within it undergo intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death. Of these moments where the individual is brought to the edges of themselves, where death is not just likely but probable. And so all of the masks drop away. And within these cultures, inherent in an initiation culture is the understanding, the bone deep, marrow deep understanding that we are an integral part of the web of life. And the containment is held not just by the web of life, but also by the elders, by the shamans, by the rest of a tribe that is a unit of reciprocal respect. And I think that's really important. This is what we have lost. Something happened, I think, 10 to 12,000 years ago at the start of our current system of agriculture that enslaves the web of life, because you can't enslave something of which you are an integral part. So something ruptured that knowing of connection. And so we don't have the contained encounters with death. We just have encounters with death and trauma, and it stacks 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 until it overflows, and we have the horrendous mental health crisis that we have in our culture. And we have an entire culture that is predicated on scarcity, separation, and powerlessness, not connection, sufficiency, and engagement. And as a result, we don't have any of that sense of respect and mutual respect. I don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but we need to find what it is to be an initiation culture in the 21st century. But I can feel roots through to a sense of what it could be like to live in reciprocal relationship of respect and responsibility with all parts of ourselves, with ourselves and each other, and with ourselves in the web of life. And from that, then everything else grows.
Welcome to Living Mirrors with Dr. James Cook. My guest this week is Manda Scott. Manda is a best-selling author and former veterinary surgeon. She's the author of 16 books, including the international best-selling Boudica Dreaming series, which depicts life in pre-Roman Britain and has been translated into over 20 languages. Her 2024 novel, Any Human Power, is an example of Thrutopian fiction, stories that show possible routes to a better future, and is a call to action for us to contribute to a different, generative, equitable, and just way forward. She is the host of the Accidental Gods podcast, which explores ways through the metacrisis that we're currently living through. Today, we discuss the metacrisis and Thrutopian fiction. Hope you enjoy the conversation. I feel I'm really happy to be talking to you today because I feel like we're kind of, there's a certain kind of archetype that we're both kind of representing coming from different perspectives, I think. We both have podcasts where we kind of chew over these kinds of reckoning with what's wrong with our current system, imagining a better future. We both write books, but you're a fiction writer. I'm a scientist and nonfiction writer. So there's these different flavors, but I feel like I sense a kindred spirit on that front. And so I'm wondering what your kind of origin is when it comes to waking up to the severity of our current situation and also the possibility that we can imagine and enact better futures.
You'd think I'd have a pat answer to that, wouldn't you, by now? I think it was very gradual. So I had a response to the most recent book, which is very overtly political. It's contemporary and it ends on the night after a general election. And I had a furious text from someone on Blue Sky. Blue Sky is meant to be the safe space, but anyway, in all caps, big rant, lots of exclamation marks, and effectively your books are too political. And my response was, sweetheart, my books have been political since day one. There has not been a single one that hasn't been political, and if you haven't noticed it yet, you are not reading them in the way that I'm writing them, which is fine. Lots of people read books in the way they're not written, but genuinely, they've been political since day one. So that was the mid-90s. So I've always existed in, or at least for a long time, I existed in two spaces. There was the part of me that was a veterinary surgeon, and I was a clinical anaesthetist at Cambridge. It was quite high-powered left-brain stuff, and yet, from early childhood, I'd been practicing what we would now probably call animist, or recently I came across panentheism, which is a kind of stage beyond pantheism. But anyway, connecting to the old gods of this land in whatever way that I could. And they began to overlap quite a lot when I was teaching at Cambridge, partly because as an anaesthetist, I realized that what I was doing was taking my anesthetic, horse, dog, cat, whatever, into the realms of the dream time and then bringing it back, and that was actually a very shamanic process, and that there were some of my students who were quite interested in that, along with, and yes, it's blood pressure is doing this, and we're watching, all of the machines that go bleep, and we're going to respond appropriately in a scientific model, but we can hold these two together. And when I made the switch to writing full time instead of being a vet, it was totally driven by my shamanic practice, and so that began then to take over, and then I began to teach. And as I'm sure you know, once you start to teach something, you have to actually understand it better and be able to create systems and structures for people that isn't just, okay, let's introduce you to the totality of everything and expect you to understand this in a weekend, which doesn't happen. And then there was a blip where I went down to Schumacher to do the Masters in Regenerative Economics, which again was totally a shamanic push. It was one of those non-negotiable, you will do this now. And economics, it was nowhere on my radar at all. I was a vet, and then I was a writer. And anyway, if I was going to do anything, I was going to do dog training. But there we are, economics. And that was a life-changing experience on every level possible. And I came home from that with a much clearer conceptual idea or understanding that we have all the answers. We know how to get through the metacrisis. We just lack the political will and the narrative structure to do that. I don't think we'll get the political will until we have the narrative structure. And so then it became urgent and all-consuming to find ways to create a narrative structure that is values-based and that connects us to the web of life, because absent that, we're going nowhere. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I wonder if you mentioned the term metacrisis. I wonder if you could unpack that for people who might be new to it.
Okay, also called the polycrisis, anything that says more than one thing. We are in a complex system, not a complicated system. And I think the distinction between those two is really important, and I'm guessing your listeners know. And therefore, there is no single solution. There isn't one single problem. This is why the whole net zero thing is so desperately frustrating, because we could zero CO2 tomorrow and our oceans would still be dead by 2045. We would still have overwhelming collapse in democracy and tech takeover and all of the other levels at which our current system is wily coyote, way out over the edge of the cliff and in the process of looking down. So there's no one thing. This is an interconnected, massive problem that requires total systemic change, and nothing less will do now. And getting people's heads around that is interesting.
Yeah. The for anyone who isn't familiar with that distinction, yeah, complicated is kind of technology we create, right? When you add lots of things together in a linear way, but a complex system like life is inherently unpredictable.
Yes.
And so you're not just going to be able to put carbon to zero and then everything's fine and peachy like it would be if you're like a dial on a car, and if you're going too fast, just slow down. It's not that kind of thing. And you mentioned that we need to first change the narrative before we can change the kind of the way that we operate. And it seems even before we can change the narrative, there needs to be, because of collective trauma, there needs to be a kind of some level of embodied healing where people are just emotionally open to something new instead of being, yes. I feel like, authoritarianism and looking to easy, simplistic answers happens when we're fearful. And in that kind of, so there needs to be a level of safety and trust that we can actually turn towards something unknown. And that can feel exciting when you feel that trust, but if you don't feel that trust, then it's scary, right? So right. I feel like here we're going to the really challenging thing to reckon with at the root of our culture. But yeah, I wonder if you could speak to just, I guess, the nature of this trauma culture that we live in.
Right. Yes, because we have that catch-22 of until people feel safe, how can they learn to trust? And unless they trust, they won't feel safe.
Right.
And we exist in a system that is designed to stop people from feeling safe. So at the moment, and everything is evolving all the time, I am sitting very much within a framing that Francis Weller created of the difference between initiation culture and trauma culture. And initiation cultures are 300,000 years plus of human evolution, 64 million years since the last mass extinction. And any indigenous cultures that have managed to maintain an initiation culture. And the hallmarks of an initiation culture are that individuals within it undergo intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death. And these are happening throughout life. We tend to fixate on the adolescent rite of passage, but birth itself is an initiation for the mother and the infant. It's not necessarily survivable. Death is an initiation into whatever happens next. And in between, there are a lot of these moments where the individual is brought to the edges of themselves, where death is not just likely, but probable. Actual death. And so all of the masks drop away. And within these cultures, inherent in an initiation culture is the understanding, the bone deep, marrow deep understanding that we are an integral part of the web of life. And that if we ask for help, that help will be given. And so the individual survives if they ask for help and are able to embody that help and listen to whatever arrives, or see it or feel it or hear it or whatever, and work with it and move forward. And then the contained encounter with death is survivable. And the containment is held not just by the web of life, but also by the elders, by the shamans, by the rest of a tribe that is a unit of reciprocal respect. And I think that's really important. This is what we have lost. And this, if we want to get into cognitive neuroscience, it hooks into the serotonin-based reward centers in our brain. And the hallmarks of serotonin reward centers are that they are additive, long duration, and they are not subject to any kind of diminishing returns. So even if we just have dinner together once a week, that may be enough to cement our sense that we are within a unit. If we're existing in a tribe where every moment of every day has a rhythm that is flowing through all of the people and the web of life, then that's a continuous thing. And then I, as the individual who has undergone whatever is the latest of these initiations, comes back more alive, more aware of what's mine to do, and more aware that if I can give all of myself in service to this thing that is mine to do, I am surrounded by people that I respect who will respect me for it. And I will be able to do it well, and they will be doing what they do well, and therefore we all function together. And contrasting that, this is me not Weller, but something happened, I think 10 to 12,000 years ago at the start of our current system of agriculture that enslaves the web of life, because you can't enslave something of which you are an integral part. So something ruptured that knowing of connection. And so we don't have the contained encounters with death. We just have encounters with death and trauma, and it stacks 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 until it overflows, and we have the horrendous mental health crisis that we have in our culture. And we have an entire culture that is predicated on scarcity, separation, and powerlessness, not connection, sufficiency, and engagement. And as a result, we don't have any of that sense of respect and mutual respect. You can see in the screaming neon daddy issues of the people who are currently running the world that desperate need to be respected by people that they want to respect and don't know how to, because there is no internal respect. Right. And so instead we end up trying to fill that gap with dopamine, and dopamine is short-acting, not additive, and it is subject to the laws of diminishing returns. And it can never fill the void inside. And yet we have an entire consumer society built on telling us that if we just have that one more thing, that box from Amazon or the super yacht or the rocket to Mars or a new Air Force One, then we'll feel okay. And we live in perpetual system of hope over experience, because it never does. But the next one will. And people with PhDs in manipulation are feeding us this stuff. So, you know, it's and social media has made it really, really effective. But we need not to be that. I don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but we need to find what it is to be an initiation culture in the 21st century. And we're not going back to Dunbar number of forager hunter tribes. That's definitely not a thing. But I can feel roots through to a sense of what it could be like to live in reciprocal relationship of respect and responsibility with all parts of ourselves, with ourselves and each other, and with ourselves in the web of life. And from that, then everything else grows.
That's an incredible articulation of our current situation. And you mentioned respect, which I think is absolutely crucial. You could describe our trauma culture as a disrespect culture as well, that we disrespect the planet, each other, and it's entirely, that's the kind of the main way we're encouraged to show up. And the flip side, another way of talking about individualism at the expense of others, and that disrespect comes from a me, not you, which is that egoic response to trauma. So it's all of a piece, and often, I mean, the compassion can arise when you see that the people, all of us showing up in that way. I often think it's a bit like if someone was cornered and felt truly under attack, and they're lashing out, and they're in some kind of psychotic delusion that they're genuinely under attack, and that's kind of how the people running us over the cliff are us in those webs of conditioning, where they've been kind of driven to some extreme state. And so it gives you that compassion to see that there's the way through is healing for everyone, universal compassion, universal healing, not othering anyone. But I feel like the seeding that healing, I mean, there's a idea I've been kind of chewing over for years now that I've not rolled out, but at some point maybe it will become a thing. But my best attempt to try and seed something like that would be decentralized groups where people can kind of learn the skills of mutual aid around sharing. Say everyone puts in a donation and you share it. Could be enabled through something like blockchain, which I know you've spoken about on your podcast. And then the point of it is a wellbeing economy based around healing, wellbeing. And so you say it's just 5 friends doing this, and you're learning these skills, and you're embodying a healthy culture. And if people can tap into that serotonin reward you described, be like, wait, this is it. This is what we want. We want to hang out with people we like and feel safe with. Like, they don't have to be perfect. We accept we're all flawed. They're good enough. Like, I can spend time with these people. I can really imagine, like, if you see that enough times, and again, kind of being informed by our biology, you probably can't expect the first version you do will just succeed. You keep attempting variation, but at some point, evolutionary dynamics could catch on. And once people see this thing that I think we both see, that there is another way, and it looks like respect, healing, community,
and it's a lot more fun. It's a way of living that isn't constantly on the hamster wheel. Nobody really believes that they were born to pay bills and die, but that's what we've been given. So yeah, look, guys, just stop that. Just walk away from that. If enough of us walk away from it, it falls over. Yes, that. I think the other thing that's really important to say is in the disrespect is we also are trained from our early childhood to disrespect ourselves for all parts of ourselves. Dick Schwartz, who started the internal family systems therapeutic modality, says almost everybody is walking around in a perpetual state of internal civil war. And most people, unless they do a lot of spiritual work, are. And healing that is crucial as well. I think we need individual, collective, and cultural through time healing to get us to where we need to be. But I also think that the more of us that do this, the easier it becomes for other people. Right. I think there's an energetic, spiritual component to this.
I think it's that thing about walking away. I think this really has a kind of fractal structure where even in an abusive relationship or an abusive household with a kind of, domineering abusive parent, the walking away, say, of the children or the partner, usually there's a whole structure of power where someone's been kind of made to feel they're not going to survive on their own. They're not going to survive without, the golden, handcuffs of whatever's being offered. And often that's it can be financial abuse or, emotional, just a whole web of making people feel, and this echoes what we said before about fear, making people turn towards authoritarianism, a kind of same thing at a political scale. So that's that I guess a possibility and to step towards freedom, because you're stepping towards the unknown, is a courageous act that is driven by, for it to not just be reckless, you need to feel it's actually genuinely possible. And to feel that, I think you're absolutely right. If there were 1,000 people in some, something like Burning Man, where everyone comes back and goes, I had this amazing time at this place, and they're actually, obviously not what Burning Man's become, but that felt like a spark of, there was some attempt, there is something similar to what we're talking about. I can imagine it. I can imagine, like, as you say, if more and more people, it makes it easier to join if there's this whole web of people who will support you and they're enacting and showing, and you feel that wisdom, and it's not just a performance.
Yes, Ottertown calls these micro exits, and there's a group doing edge cities where for a month they create this space for easily 1,000 people. There's one happening in California sometime this summer, and I think there's been one in Portugal. And these are explicitly an attempt to do this. They're very tech-based, they're very blockchain-based, they're people in the refi space, and I would really like to find a way to create one that was tech and spirituality, genuine spirituality, not fluffy, flaky, let's just talk about it, but actual, how are we actually going to connect to the web of life while creating this edge city? I think that would be really exciting.
Yeah, and I think what you said about spirituality there is the same point I was going to come to, which is the when I said that people need to feel the genuine wisdom of it. It's not, when we say spirituality, I mean the inverse of a performative social media spirituality that's alienating to a lot of people. Yes. That's kind of very much about you and your sense of wanting that respect, that wounded, like that whole performance. People can feel it, and this is partly why I'm so. I talk a lot about science and how this stuff matches with science, because to me, what I'm saying is I'm talking about what's real. I'm talking about. Right. I'm not talking about some fun ideas I've come up with. I'm talking about
it's grounded in tangible things. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And I heard you say on a podcast about, I think it was from Extinction Rebellion, talking about this phrase, progress happens at the speed of trust. Yeah. And I think there's a similar thing here. It's kind of what we're pointing to. And for me, the science piece is that as well, as saying, doing people the service of being like, these are not just alienating ideas that are uncoupled from reality. Like, you can trust that we're going to show our working out and be reachable, be reasonable. You can debate this, you can talk. Like, we're not just telling you dogmatically how this is.
And you can test it. Because a lot of the internet, what I would call Disney spirituality, is if you think good thoughts, your life will be perfect.
Right.
And if your life is not perfect, it's because you just didn't think good enough thoughts. But I did, who is teaching you and charging you $1,000 an hour to do this. So it's obviously possible and you're not doing it right. And that's just designed to destroy people. And we need to offer people, I don't know what timescale you think we're working on, but I think we're working on years rather than decades. We do not have time to piss around doing that kind of stuff. It's not clever.
Right.
So, how can we actually ground people in something, go, look, this works. This is how we are wired. This will be okay.
And I think the skill set you have in fiction writing is, we mentioned that people need, the stuff you point to around thinking the right thoughts. It's interesting because there have been a few books about the kind of neuroscience of manifestation, because there is an actual tangible way in which what we believe, what we think shapes the trajectory we go on. So there is actually, I know you know this, but it's absolutely central role for imagination and thinking, those futures. I wonder if you could share your reflections on the role of fiction and imagination and at this point in our history.
Yes, because, and you're right, this is one of the things that the manifestation crowd hinge on, is if you can imagine your future strongly enough, you will step into it. And up to a point, this is absolutely true. The thing that I think people get hooked up on is you have to have all parts of yourself on board with this, and a lot of people have one part that wants X and 19 other parts that are going, you don't deserve it, or it's not the right thing, or it's not going to happen, or the sabotage happens really easily. And also, I listened to another podcast way back where someone was describing going to a circle in Colorado, I think, and the person at the head of the circle, who's really good at manifesting, had decided that they were so good that the next thing that they really deserved was a private jet. And that blows all of my fuses, because if you are that good at creating futures that happen, what the very many expletives deleted are you doing manifesting a private jet? I mean, really, honestly, how wounded are you inside to be doing that? And that also shows us that you can have a complete void in the part of you that actually needs to be whole and still be quite good at making things happen. So what happens if we bring those together and we heal the void, and then we really are capable of imagining? Because I genuinely think where we imagine we're going is where we get to, and we're all very good at imagining dystopic futures. I am now really angry with my fiction writing colleagues who think they're going to write another dystopia, and every single one of them thinks that if they can only show people how bad it's going to be, then everybody will change behavior. And that, from a cognitive neuroscience point of view, that can't work. It will never work, because unless you give people options of how to change behavior, you can hold a gun at someone's head. If I hold a gun at your head now and go change your behavior, what are you going to do? What do you want me to do? Speak a different language? Stand on one foot? Walk backwards? Lie on the floor? What do you want me to do? If I don't give you options that will work, you're going to end up with a bullet in your head because I haven't shown you, this is very bad, but hey, you need options. And yet, if we get yet another iteration of The Handmaid's Tale meets The Road, we have yet another bit of internal stuff. And again, neuroscience is showing us, if I internalize this, if I see it on television, if I read a book and I'm good at internalizing books, my energetic space is not capable of differentiating between what was fiction and what actually happened in my past. So my assumption is that this is a real thing. And that's not a clever thing to be doing. And I do not understand why people are doing it, except that it sells, and so people produce more of it. So we're locked back into this is a predatory capital death cult creating its own ending. But then we could turn that around, exactly as we're saying. So I have a concept that dystopia not useful, utopia not useful because you can't see how to get there. Lovely, beautiful futures, but they're usually on a different planet, or there's been a jump cut between here and there. And what we need are Thrutopias, which lead us from a recognizable present, step by step, through towards a future where everybody's going to go, heck yes, that's better. Why are we not doing that? And look, it's not that hard. We just need to let go of a bunch of systems and assumptions that are not working for anybody. And most of us would be happy to let go of if we thought everybody else was letting go of them. And we just need a critical mass of people to go, no, that's not useful. We don't want to do that anymore. We don't want vigilante bond markets telling us how economies work. We don't want an economy that is predicated on growth rather than on welfare of people and planet. We want a governance system where we have power to those with wisdom and wisdom to those with power. None of this is complicated. And it's blindingly obvious once you see it. But we don't see how to make it happen. So I think urgently now, anyone who writes listening, please stop writing anything that you're writing that is dystopic or utopic and start writing the things that will actually get us through. And that's hard. Trust me, it's considerably harder than writing anything else because you have to sit down and work it out. But it's not impossible. And I don't think we need it.
I think the popularity of dystopia, it's crazily, it's less confronting to imagine being a fearful, under threat individual in a kind of Mad Max landscape, because it keeps all of our psychological, individualist, separate, fear-based modes intact. So it's easier to imagine that than it's less confronting emotionally to imagine that, even than to imagine a utopia where actually it's very intimate and very about this kind of emotional health. That actually is like, oh, wait, now I'm in touch with, do I deserve that? I have this core woundedness that we all have, and it's confronting. So it kind of takes you into that inner workspace.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Do you see?
And how do you write novels that would take you forward without preaching to people who don't want to be preached to, and telling them that all of the things that you've just said, and it's really hard to get people gradually to a place where this makes sense, rather than starting there where you're going to lose 99% of your readership on the first page.
Right. And with, I feel like I just was talking about the kind of inner work, healing, spirituality side of things. And I feel like it can be very alienating to many people. And so that's the kind of intersection I labor at to try and make that less alienating. And I wonder, in your, because you go in your book, your Thrutopia and Human Power is very tied up with your work in shamanism. And I wonder how you've experienced that for people, if your readers, find that, because obviously there's the desire to communicate this is a core part of what we need to be reckoning with. And, but it can also, people can't be, sometimes not ready. So I wonder how you deal with that, how you've experienced that kind of intersection.
Well, the thing about writing a book, as you know, is once it's out in the world, you have no control anymore over how anybody comes to it. So all I needed to get it past was my publisher. And that was okay. Seriously, so this comes on the back of having written the Boudica series. I have an existing readership that is absolutely ready and open to this, because the Boudica books were Boudica Dreaming, for 4 books, and it was looking at our shamanic past before and during and immediately after the Roman invasion and colonization. It was looking at I didn't know the words then, but our initiation culture and how it was destroyed. And so bringing that into the contemporary world, I don't think I would have got away with it back in the late 90s when I started the Boudica series. I just don't think anyone would have published it. But, we are where we are, and we did. And so I already have people who are open to that. And the challenge then was taking them and introducing them to tech and politics, basically. And that had to be done quite carefully. And then there were the people who are already into the tech and the politics, and introducing them to something that they can consider to be natural magic if they want to. Seems to have worked. I am sure there are people who pick it up and put it straight down again, but I don't hear from them. I hear from the people whose lives it has changed, which is lovely. And if it hasn't changed your life, please don't feel the need to send me another email. I get over 500 emails a day. I don't need a single one that isn't going to make my life better. So it seems to be landing reasonably well. And even in the sci-fi and fantasy community, which isn't really my field, the reviews have been good. People have got it. And I think, again, probably a few years ago that would have been less the case, but I think there are very few people who don't, at a core level, understand that we are on the edge of a cliff now, and are at least interested in trying to consider one of the ways we could go forward. Actually, that's not true. Some of the people who really hated it are the old white men. So the people who do the reviews for the Scotsman absolutely hated it. But that's not surprising, I think, because the old white men are who got us here. And what the book says is that was not a clever thing to do. We need to do something different in spite of them. So that's not at all unexpected. But what I did find in some of that style was, okay, so we don't think this is a good answer, but then we have to think up a better answer. And that's fine. If you don't like my answer, that's completely fine. But you have to think up one that's at least as good, if not better, and then tell us, because we're in the middle of the sixth mass extinction. We don't have time to piss about arguing over how we get forward. As long as we find ways that work, then let's go with the ways that work.
Yeah, I've seen you when your kind of podcast launching the book saying that exactly the point. The point isn't to be like, look, I figured it out. This is the one vision of the future. The idea is to inspire more people to write and to write these Thrutopias. And yeah, it totally fits with the kind of biological inspired evolutionary thing I was saying earlier about, if we just need lots of attempts, and then maybe one will be the one that resonates for just through chance,
Yes,
and then gets replicated. And through your own kind of shamanic practices, that I've heard you mention that there was kind of visions that led to this, your experience that led to this book, but I didn't hear the kind of details of that in what I listened to. I was wondering if you could share about that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and keep this tight. I got back from Schumacher and thought that I'd stopped writing. Partly the last book took 17 edits and it broke me. I hated it. And I thought, I don't need to do this anymore. I set up the podcast, set up the membership program, which was endeavoring to give people a structured way to connect with the web of life, because that seemed, the visions that I was having then was telling me that's what I needed to do. And then lockdown happened. And I live in a small holding in the middle of nowhere. It actually didn't really touch us much, except I didn't have to go and do the things I didn't really want to go and do. But we had to start teaching online. So I teach the shamanic work and I teach in person, and then we couldn't. And what we discovered, and I'm guessing you probably discovered this too, is that actually things where I genuinely believed people had to be lying in the room, shoulder to shoulder, holding hands in order to do specific work, they could do online. And they could do it where someone's in New Zealand and someone else is in Michigan, and it actually works better, which was a real revelation. And so there was one particular course that I said I was definitely not ever going to teach online, because I definitely needed people in the room. And in the end, I had students in Germany and Ireland and Switzerland, and they would all have had to do 2 weeks quarantine either end of coming to work. And they, okay, we're going to do this online. I have no idea how this will go. And there's a big journey in the middle of it. And I had a series of visions, which is not usual. It's not completely unusual, but it's not common. And what was really unusual was that they were plain text. Usually, again, I'm sure you know, with spiritual work, there's felt senses and nudges, and it can take a long time to keep asking, I don't quite get this, what is it you actually need me to do, until something emerges. And this was absolutely plain text. Take the 30,000-year-old fossilized horse's tooth that holds one side of the gate of the altar that we were using at that point, take it up the hill, get some ethically sourced horsehide. It was lockdown, that took me a month. bind it on the hawthorn, the old laid hedge. This, when we took up the floor in this cottage, there was an old fire ring with chicken bones still in it. This cottage has been here since Tudor times, if not before. So the hedges are really old. So there's a laid hedge where the hawthorn is broad and pretty much horizontal to the ground. Bind the tooth on there, sit with it in the small of my back, then looking southwest down the valley in a particular frame of mind for at least an hour as the sun goes down every night until further notice. And it was that precise. And if I've learned anything in decades and decades of doing this work, it's you don't ask why. If something comes that clear, you do it. That's what got me to Schumacher. It's what got me writing the Boudica books. It's okay, I will do this. So that was June 21st. It took me till near the end of July to get everything set up, particularly the horse side. And by the 9th of August, I had the opening scene of Any Human Power and the 3 void scenes and the understanding that I needed to write a book that would bring together everything that I was doing on the podcast. Because I knew that we have all the answers. But what I understood sitting on the hill, or what was given to me, was that by doing the podcast week after week after week and having done Schumacher, I had the capacity to link everything together into a narrative structure that would work. And that this isn't as obvious as I think it is. And that I needed to do it. And then it was, you don't need to sit up the hill anymore, you can if you want, but now you need to write this book. Which meant I was studying to be a homeopath at the time. And I discovered I don't have the bandwidth to write a book and learn homeopathy, so I had to give that up. But Any Human Power was the result. I had a lot of help writing it, because it is incredibly hard. Even though I think I know everything, to stitch everything together in a way that makes sense. And with the starting point that I'd been given, and this is not a spoiler, but the lead character dies at the end of the second chapter. So I was telling it from the perspective of someone who was caught in that liminal space between the lands of life and the lands of death, having made a promise that held her there. And so I had to work with that also. And I learned a lot, a huge amount.
That theme of death, yeah, we mentioned that in initiation cultures, there's this kind of confronting death, and I think you're absolutely right, that's kind of our fear of death and aversion to it is, or rather just a kind of an immature response of just recoiling without the wisdom to know why one might kind of touch into it, confront it. That seems to be the kind of the core, you could say, like generative mechanism that keeps us in that trauma culture of just keep turning away from it, keep turning away. And if we could just, if we just this is a more kind of Buddhist framing, but if we turn our attention towards impermanence and the fact of loss in every moment, that to me, that experientially, that's really, you can start to open yourself up in any moment to that dimension of reality, not just the up, but the downside, which feels, when I say the downside from the egoic perspective, it feels down, like down is bad. That's the bad side until you really internalize it. And then it's the wholeness, which is why you start to be like, why did I think this transformation of death was intrinsically bad? Like you kind of forget why you even have that kind of belief system. Yes. if you dwell on it long enough.
You begin to embrace it, I think. And this is years ago, Castaneda talked about having death over our left shoulder as our teacher. And I'm not a great fan of Castaneda in any respect, but he said 2 useful things. One was that, and the other was noticing the cubic centimeter of chance. So that thing of embracing death as a rite of passage that could come at any moment. Running away from it is insane. The whole humanist movement that they think they've solved for death. Guys, are you serious? You want to stay in primary school forever? Why? Why? So I think also I looked, in retrospect, I didn't understand this at the time I was writing it, but in the gap between writing it and it being published, discovered some research that showed that you get someone to fill in a political questionnaire, say, and they fill it in on their way to the left of Bernie Sanders and AOC, and this is always all done in the States, or it was until they destroyed the academic system over there. And then you do the same again, you let them forget that, do it again in a month, but this time they're outside a funeral parlour or near a cemetery, or there's a funeral cortege going past or something, and they fill in the same questionnaire and they are to the right of Trump and Musk. And you show them the first one and they go, no, that wasn't mine. You've made a mistake. I didn't do this. This is what I believe. This new, super right. And all you've done is subliminally trigger their awareness of death. And they want the certainties of what the right offers, that in-group that is protected but not constrained, and the out-group that is constrained but not protected, and everybody by definition believes themselves to be in the in-group until they discover they're not. So I think part of why the book was given to me the way it was in an effort to make us less afraid of death, to embrace it as a rite of passage, to be met with courage and grace and compassion for all parts of ourselves, and a sense of awe and wonder. And instead of our culture's bizarre terror of something that is an innate part of living.
They've done the same studies with half the groups get the smell of garbage pumped into the room while they're doing the questionnaire, and half don't. And the same thing, it pushes people to the right, and which to me shows there's a real kind of at the core level of policing our inner outer boundary as an organism in terms of our immune system being like, I don't want bacteria, that's the threat to me, that points towards death. I'm going to, it's me, not you, that the thing we were talking about at the beginning. So, I mean, once one starts, I feel like language, ideas, if before one does any spiritual work, we kind of live in this fantasy world where we're just seeing through all our concepts. And then when you kind of take this descent, to me now, human society looks like these organisms that are very much concerned just with death, sex, craving, and all the words of this kind of, exactly. All the stories and stuff are very much this kind of fluff kind of coming up from this kind of writhing mass of organisms that are really just, I used to believe the stories, and now I kind of see through them often to what's really being communicated at that emotional level. And I thought it was interesting in Human Power how early on, not to give away much, but there's a kind of almost like a warfare around kind of, you could say around kind of sexual outing or shaming or of the concern with what people are doing sexually, which I thought was quite apposite as well, because I think that is how it would play out. That is where we, as social primates, where sex is a very powerful biological driver, that is the fundamental kind of area where we're like, and it often doesn't get addressed in spiritual communities as well, with all the abuse scandals you see. It's so deeply rooted that almost like that's the real root that's really hard to get down to, is death, sex, social shaming, because as social primates, to be shamed and ostracized means death as well. Which makes sense as to why a lot of these utopian kind of solutions often do have things like polyamory, universal love in the 60s, that there is this kind of attempt to reckon with that, but I feel like that wasn't held particularly wisely probably as well. And I think this comes down to wisdom and the kind of, I've heard you talk about adulthood and elderhood, and I think that's kind of missing from, kind of non-spiritual, political, radical approaches that don't appreciate wisdom and spirituality and miss this piece. I think that there's a place, when you look at indigenous cultures, there's usually some consensual kind of relationship with wise elders who are respected because of their tangible wisdom, because not in some authoritarian leadership way. If they became corrupt and unwise, then that consent would be revoked and people wouldn't be. But then I think there's a kind of aversion to that in a simplistic way, but I think people map that onto some kind of hierarchy, some king figure or something that's bad. But I think there's something there. I think that could be one of the hardest things to organically grow, is like a sincere, just to grow wisdom to a point where it's just recognized for what it is. You can't fake that. You can't force that. You can't legislate that.
Yes, you're right. And this is surfing off Bill Plotkin, who has a whole concept that any human being goes through infancy, childhood and infancy, adolescence, adulthood and elderhood, and that there are two phases within each, and one is integration with self and other human, and the other is integration with the more than human world, or the web of life, whatever we call it. And that almost all of our trauma culture is locked in early adolescence, and we can get to be 105 years old and die and still be locked in early adolescence. And yet what we need is the elders to exactly be, as you say, to be people that we can come to in good faith, be vulnerable with, and be safe with. And that's really hard to find. But it doesn't mean we can't try, and it doesn't mean that those who are trying can't endeavor to model it to the best of their ability, because I think everybody feels safer when there's an adult in the room. Right. It's like watching Mark Carney in Canada in the when he's in the presence of Trump, and everybody, I think, their shoulders drop a bit and they breathe out better. And I'm not a great fan of capitalism. I think we need a post-capitalist culture, but at least there's an adult in the room who appears to have good levels of emotional literacy. I would trust being in the presence of Carney. There are lots of other people, obviously, that I would trust being in the presence of. And we need to find those people and get past the egoic need to create hierarchies. That seems to me one of the hallmarks of our trauma culture, is this need to elevate the dark triad of sociopathy, narcissism, and sadism. And every other culture, every other normal indigenous initiation culture explicitly finds ways for that not to happen. And our culture explicitly elevates those people, and it's not a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned not being a fan of capitalism. And I think at this point, it's almost beyond the point where it matters if we're fans of capitalism or not, because post-capitalism is coming, and it really matters if that's going to look like some techno-feudalism thing where we're all serfs with, starving in the streets while there are 5 billionaires, or does that look like democracy, basically, which I think is
an actual democracy instead of the pseudo-democracy that we've had. I think the thing that gives me hope is Bannon is not going to get his 10,000-year Reich. There is no way that techno-feudalism survives the biophysical impact because it's in denial about the nature of climate change, unless the core of what they're doing is actually trying to wipe out everyone except 100,000 people, which I wouldn't surprise me if that was the game plan, but they're not going about it terribly efficiently. So there are two options. One is we reduce the human population by force, and the few who are left are subjugated to the 5 billionaires and their families. But even then, there's an interesting theory that came through on Nate Hagen's podcast with a Russian scientist who's based in the States now, whose name I will never be able to pronounce, but who says that every 80 years there is an overproduction of elites. Because the elites cannot stop themselves in our culture, in the trauma culture, from acquiring more and more and more and expecting that sense of entitlement to more and more. And then you get a whole horizontal level of people where only the top few can have the stuff. And the others have been brought up believing that they deserve and are going to get the stuff. And they're the ones that create the revolutions. And they do it in the name of the people at the bottom who are never going to get the stuff. And most of the elites are lawyers, and America was producing, this was recorded before the Trump administration started, 6-1, so 6 lawyers for every 1 legal position. I would suggest that number the ratio has now gone further into the realms of unemployed lawyers, and that the lawyers are the people who go, okay, now is the time to have a complete change. So I don't see how the techno-feudalism can survive unless they massively reduce the human population, which would be incredibly sad. And I also don't see really how they would do that. Once you start wiping out people, it's quite hard to stop. You can't just say, okay, this 100,000 survives, everybody else is gone. I don't think it works like that. And the only other alternative is that we all wake up and grow up and actually do the work and bring ourselves to a genuine connection and a genuine set of values. I think this is really, for me, really important now, is we have the spiritual understanding. But I think for people, we can't, wait for everyone to want to have a spiritual awakening, because I think we haven't got time for that. But we could coalesce around common values. At the point when Trump had newly been inaugurated, and we had extended members of our family who think he's a very fine gentleman and everything he's doing is wonderful, and I was a bit triggered. And I could have had the conversations that were basically screaming at each other. And I was trying to remember everything that I'd learned. Big deep breath and go, okay, so where are you going with this? And genuinely, without any sense of irony, they said, we just want people to be kinder to each other. And that they thought he was going to get to that, because they saw anyone in the progressive woke left as being vicious and nasty and determined to destroy everything.
Right.
And I thought in that, at the point when all the other parts of me had stopped falling over in a screaming heap, there was a part of me that, okay, we all want everyone to be kinder to each other. We could agree on that. Let's start with that as our baseline. And I think the values of integrity and compassion and courage and generosity of spirit are pretty much universal if you get people in their untriggered state. And then I think we could have a layer of asks. Okay, so these are the values from which we are coming. And what we're asking for is clean air, clean water, clean soil, from which we can grow clean food. How could you argue against that? No, I definitely want toxic water, which we have. The rain is full of PFAs now and glyphosate. We are poisoning ourselves in a huge uncontrolled experiment. We have no idea what happens when everything living on the planet is ingesting PFAs, but it isn't going to be good. So what happens if we clean up and we have clean air that we can actually breathe without killing us, clean water that we can drink without changing our entire endocrine system, clean soil so we can grow food that is not giving us type 2 diabetes all of the time? And then clean, clear, courageous, compassionate connections between all parts of ourselves. We have to do the inner work. Between ourselves and each other, we have to work out the social technologies that can work with who we are now, and between ourselves and the web of life. And at the moment, I have a sense that if everybody woke up tomorrow morning and that was their set of priorities, capitalism would be over by the evening. And we would be working towards ways of working together to flourish. And humanity is unbelievably creative. If we stopped trying to make money in a zero-sum game and started trying to flourish within a flourishing ecosphere, we could do it.
Yeah, I think we share that sense that the kind of a path of degrowth where instead of doing things for a kind of a metric in terms of growth and profit that should be secondary to what we truly care about, instead of fixating on the metric. Well, because really it's a metric for instrumental power and its concentration. So that that's really what it's maximizing, which for the dark triad people works very well because then they can keep getting more power. And so actually having, a model in which you prioritize well-being and the things we genuinely care about, the multifaceted value of the natural world, where that can't be all condensed into a single number. That's clearly the future that we all want, but even if we don't realize it. And if someone's kind of inspired by this to start making change in their life, I feel like turning inward and doing that work and also listening to your podcast would be a great place to start, because I feel like
ideas.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like the ideas, the inner work and the ideas are perhaps the first step. Like if you rush to try and take part in something without tuning into your inner world and at least being inspired, what would you say to someone who's interested? What should I do after this?
Yeah, good question. I am contemplating writing a non-fiction book that is more or less along those lines, because the key thing is to do the inner work. But not everybody is moved to do that or has the resources and the capacity. And so then we need to not get fixated on single fixes. I think that's really important. So if you want to be vegan, that's completely fine, but don't do it because you think it's going to solve everything, because there is nothing that will solve everything. Driving electric cars, changing our recycling, nothing will solve everything. We need to be doing bits of everything. And the single thing that I think is most important is to start having conversations with people along the lines of the futures we are being sold are not the futures that any of us actually want. We don't want a future full of racism and sexism and all of that, because I just don't think anybody really does. We want futures of connectivity and reciprocal respect. And how can you, in your language, in ways that you really believe and you really feel, begin to have the conversations that are not designed to trigger other people into the very familiar head-mind clashes, but are speaking heart-mind to heart-mind, opening your vulnerabilities so that they can open their vulnerabilities, being grounded enough and resilient enough to let the other people around you feel that they can trust this space. I think that's the single most important thing we can do. There's a whole bunch of practical stuff, so you can shift your bank away from something that's supporting fossil fuels. You can do minor things within the system. Start eating, insofar as you can, food that is locally grown on land that you can walk across, if that's possible for you. But for a lot of people, it isn't. Decide where your water comes from. decide how much you move around, because I think we've floated on fossil fuel transport for a long time and we have to just minimize that. There's a lot of small things that added up would make a difference, but nothing is going to make a big enough difference if we don't change the narrative of who we are and where we're going. So doing that, sit down and work out how we could possibly get through to a future that you would be proud to leave to the generations who are not yet even born. What would you be proud to leave behind? How would they feel if they wake up in the morning? And how do you see a world where that happens? And then share those ideas with people.
I think the that sense of showing up and connecting in a way that with people where it's good enough is hugely important. And the kind of universal story you gave of family members who have opposing political values and how activating that can be, and when someone's here is good enough, they may think, okay, well, someone has 90% the same opinions as me, and there's some 10% that I can agree with. Whereas what I think we need really is this feeds back into a kind of spiritual awakening in terms of a shedding of identity structures and an openness to grief. Because if you can show up with that person and accept that they are in your family and let that really kind of challenge those attachments of identity that you're saying, no, I want to be a good person. I don't want to be talking to someone who I think is a bad person. If you can if you can grieve and let go of whatever it is in your past that's keeping you holding on there, and come to a compassion. And I'm not saying you then like their opinions and you decide, oh, it's totally great that you want policies that will harm people, but there's that process can happen. There can be a coming into genuine seeing that this is another you. This is you in another person's skin, another person's conditioning, and there can be that meeting, and it goes from being good enough to being something really beautiful, and I think has the power to transform if we all started doing that and not othering. Which again doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable, and you're not in that intimacy. You can really be honest about what harm you think they're causing, and if they feel that respect and that compassion, they're more likely to hear rather than just being in that reactive state of mind.
Yes, absolutely. And it's establishing the mutual respect first and doing it. I did a podcast recently with a woman who specializes in conflict resolution, and we were talking a lot about street epistemology, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's really interesting. And it was started by a guy who would go into the American really radical Christian campuses and try and change people's minds, which of course was not going to be a thing. But he recorded everything that he was doing, and he created quite a big online community, and people would critique what he did. And now he goes into the campuses without the intention of changing anybody's mind, and simply with, let me understand what you believe. And in the first 10, 15 minutes, you get the elevator speech of, here's what I have rehearsed endlessly of, this is why I believe what I believe. But the more you keep asking, the more the individual that you're engaging with begins to unpick the sources of what they believe. And it is a really enriching experience for both sides. And I think being able to step into that space where I don't have to persuade somebody that I'm right and they're wrong, however much various parts of me thrive on doing exactly that. If I can reach a space where this is really interesting, let's explore it more deeply, we're going to reach that place of reciprocal respect from which mutual understanding arises. And I need not to go into that convinced that I'm going to persuade them to believe everything that I believe, and I am never going to believe anything that they believe. And that's hard, really, really hard. The only thing that I find helps, I work a lot with horses, and there's a whole way of training horses where you step into the space and you abandon all expectation. And even having the expectation that you're going to abandon all expectation, horses are a great mirror and they'll just walk away. So it's been a real useful rehearsal for people feel things. Once, I'm sure you're aware, once you begin to be more aware of your internal dynamics, you can feel interpersonal dynamics. And everybody's bullshit meter can go from 0 to 100 in a microsecond if you're not coming from a place of authenticity. So we need to find our authenticity and really be okay with that, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned these challenging conversations, but this has been the absolute opposite, absolutely nourishing, wonderful opportunity to meet you. I really it's very validating to meet someone who's seen just identical kind of diagnosis, of what's before us. It makes me feel like I'm not just seeing some mirage. It's really, it is what's going on. Yeah. And so there's your Thrutopian novel, Any Human Power, and your podcast, Accidental Gods, which really goes into the details of all different aspects of what we've been talking about. Is there anything else you would kind of point people to if they want to look into your work more?
Yeah, there's the Accidental Gods membership, which is accessed same place. So Accidental Gods, all one word, .life, gets you to the podcast and gets you to the membership. And that is a structured program really endeavoring to give people ways to actually connect with the web of life that work. And for the shamanic people, there's Dreaming Awake, all one word, .co.uk, where we do the one-to-one training. My senior apprentice is doing the foundations and the first 5 years. It's a 10-year program and nobody yet has gone around it in less than 14 years. And I realized that I was going to need to retire at some point. So she's picking it up. But that's a one-to-one training that takes all of the concepts. These all arise from the same place. So Accidental Gods is self-teaching and safe for people to do on their own. And then the more contained shamanic work is stuff that you need to be taught one-to-one. So yeah, that's there too. There's also a Thrutopian masterclass, which is again Thrutopia, that's THRU-topia .life, where we did that as an online 6 month every alternate Sunday live, and then we recorded it. So if people are interested in the writing, because what I realized writing Any Human Power was if I hadn't been doing the podcast, which goes into economics and food and farming systems and transport and electrics and everything, governance systems, if I hadn't done that, I would not have been able to write the book. So we endeavored to bring everything together in a very big space to give people access to that. So that's there too.
That's great. And thank you again.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Thanks for listening. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you want to help the podcast reach a wider audience, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Finally, if you want to offer financial support, you can go to patreon.com/Dr. James Cook.